Hey everyone, welcome back to Brandi Reads, and now stitches. This is a pattern that I did for Assistant to the Villain. It's my first pattern related to a book that I've read. Of course, you know, with life you pick up new hobbies, and stitching or embroidering falls right in line with reading and kind of goes well with that. So I wanted to incorporate the two together. So this is the birth of Brandi Reads and stitches. We will of course be discussing Assistant to the Villain, but I'll also be going over the stitches and the technique that I'm using for stitching this embroidery project. I would say that it would be Brandi Reads and embroiders, but there's other stitching projects that I would like to incorporate and do as well, and they're not all embroidery. There's some slow stitching and some other things that I would like to explore with this avenue. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm sure you have noticed by now that this is pretty sped up, and you will thank me later on, trust me. It took days to do these letters, and obviously you don't want to spend days watching me stitch these letters, and I didn't even record all of the stitching of the letters because it took so long. That is partly due to the size thread that I chose to stitch the letters with, and then also just the sheer amount of letters to be stitched in the first place. That I had nothing to do with. So I did decide that I would not use this thread for stitching letters again in the future if I ever decide to stitch another title, which at the moment I am greatly against. This thread is DMC Pearl Cotton of 8mm, yeah, 8mm with a single strand, which is about the equivalent of 2 strands of embroidery floss. For anyone unfamiliar with embroidery floss, see, there it is. Embroidery floss is 6 strands of cotton thread that can be separated down into as small as single strand uses. It's more commonly used in 2 to single strand uses in cross stitch or finer detail work, but embroidery itself most commonly uses 6 strands, and this is the size difference of 4 strands from 1 strand of embroidery floss, which you will see 6 strands of embroidery floss in use in this project. Throughout most of it, there are a couple of times where I break it down into 3 strands, but we'll get into that as we go along. Now, Assistant to the Villain. Oh my gosh, so much fun. I absolutely loved this book. It was just a fantasy rom-com, really at its best. I was blown away. It was not at all what I expected. Like, from the blurb on the back of the book, it sounds pretty dark, and you're just kind of like, or at least for me, I am, because dark is just not my thing. Now, with that being said, if dark is your thing, you're not going to be left out of this book either. While it's not just super over-the-top dark, it does have some darker aspects to it. Severed heads, squished eyeballs, things of that nature. Finally, we're done with the letters. Moving on to this little vine over here, super cute. So I'll put the thread numbers, which correlates with their colors, on the screen so that you can see that. But this is the stem stitch, which I used for the lettering, but this is with 6 strands of embroidery floss, so you can see it's much thicker, much fuller, and just has an overall better look. And this thread does not tangle near as badly as the other that I was using, the pearl cotton. That one was difficult and extremely tangly, for lack of a better word at the moment. So then again, we move on from the stem stitch doing the leaves. This is not truly a leaf stitch. This is more of a satin stitch to get this effect, because these are smaller, and while a smaller lazy daisy stitch would not work for these stitches, this quick little satin stitch worked great for these leaves. So back to Assistant to the Villain. Assistant to the Villain takes place in the mythical world of Rindon. Rindon is the fantasy land where Evie lives in a small town, or a small village, if you will, and the villain is the dark shadow that kind of hovers over the kingdom, and the king and his men are trying to hunt down the villain, and Evie is your happy-go-lucky, sunshine and butterflies. Even through the toughest times in life, she can find the rainbow, if you will, or the spot of sunshine in all of the bad. So she is a little on the ditzy side sometimes, you feel like, in not necessarily a terrible way, but you know, sometimes you're just a little, are you paying attention to what's going on around you, kind of thing. But she does start seeing some things, she does start understanding some things, but she is knowingly and willingly working for the villain, because it's a means to an end as far as she's concerned. She's got to put food on the table, she's got a little sister at home and a sick father. Now this book is packed with dysfunctional family, on all sides. So if you don't like dysfunctional families, you might not like this one, but it's quirky dysfunctional for the most part, and then it's also build your own dysfunctional family that works best for you kind of thing, which just really made it a little more endearing than most dysfunctional family things. You like Evie, you're rooting for Evie. The villain isn't, I mean, he's hot, so you're not just totally anti-villain to start with, and I have to say, you never really get to the totally anti-villain part of it, because you start learning some things. Of course, he's got a backstory too, and you find out what makes him tick and why he is the way that he is, and maybe he's really not as bad as everybody says he is, right? So some things start coming to light, things start coming out in the open, and just secrets that nobody was supposed to know are now being found out, but then it only opens more questions, leaves more openings for, well, okay, this happened, now what? So we'll discuss book 2 in a different video with a different embroidery project. So but this one was lots of fun, and like I said, you really love Evie, and it just sets up this beautiful cast of characters that works. I mean, it just works. Everybody from Evie and the villain to Alyssa, Evie's little sister, to the king and Evie's dad, and just lots of things coming into play, and you've got the Malevolent Guard, and then you've got the King's Guard, and they have a specific name, and I'm going blank on that at the moment. That aside, Nicole Maehrer, the author of Assistant to the Villain, did an amazing job just plotting this and bringing everything together and the way it unfolds and stuff. Like, I love a well-written story, a well-plotted story, and one that can keep you immersed and engrossed and wanting to continue the story to find out the rest of what happens and keep you turning pages. And this was definitely one of those stories that just keeps you turning pages. Fantasy is one of my go-to genres, and I love when you can give me a fantasy that's also a popcorn read, or a palate cleanser, as I like to call them. They're quick, they're fun. A lot of fantasy gets heavy and not necessarily dark, but they're very plot heavy. They're very just heavy in general, character development and stuff like that. And while there is good character development and a good storyline and plot, it's not so heavy that you feel like you've got to take a breather from it when you finished it, just to kind of relax and decompress again. And yes, reading is relaxing and stuff, but I do like those little fun rom-coms in between the heavier stuff, just as palate cleansers, and this was the best of both worlds for me. This was a palate cleanser in a fantasy, so I really enjoyed that. and again, just a great cast of characters that works well together, and just very well thought out and very well plotted and planned. So kudos to Hannah for just bringing this all together. And this is the French knot stitch. It's just this very cute little knot that adds detail to things. So we're going to do a cluster of French knots in the center of this, what's going to be a woven wheel rose that you will see shortly as well. So the French knot, this one I did 3 turns around the needle with 6 strands of embroidery floss, and again, the number for this color will be up on the screen. These knots do take a little bit of practice to get comfortable with them and what you would consider good at them, but once you do, you'll use them in a lot of things just for the detail and the definition they can give to pretty much any project that you want to do. Now we are going to do the spokes for the woven wheel. This is a 5-spoke woven wheel. The spokes are done in 6 strands of embroidery floss, and the woven wheel itself will be done in 12 strands. So we'll look at that in just a second. So you just do those little spokes real quick, tie it off on the back, and then you bring your 12 strands of embroidery floss up. So it's just 6 strands doubled really, so you're not adding any extra thread to your needle, but you are using all of the thread in your needle, not just one side of that. So you're going to weave, just as the name implies, you're going to weave your thread in these spokes. So you're going to continue a over and under pattern with these spokes. So and you'll fill in the spokes and cover them up completely by the end of it. But the purpose of it being odd numbered spokes is so that your weave every time you go around is different. You're going over and under a different spoke each time. So this is such a pretty flower, and it's very 3-dimensional. I always love when a pattern calls for these woven wheels. They're still just one of my favorite stitches to do in embroidery. Once we finish this one, we're going to do a 3-spoke woven wheel, which I have just recently started doing, and I really love the look of those as well. It's completely different. You wouldn't think it would be that much different, but for me, or to me, it's just a completely different look than the 5-spoke, but it's still a very pretty stitch and one I enjoy doing. So we're going to finish off this woven wheel. I like to add a little extra oomph to mine, if you will, to give it a little more not texture, but a little, just to keep it from going flat or looking flat, because in some cases woven wheels can look flat, and I definitely don't want mine to look flat. So always add these extra little stitches in at the end to give it a well-rounded look, and to make sure that all of the spokes are well hidden. So, and unfortunately I did not know this until editing the video, but the 3-spoke woven wheel, while it's shown, the video shows me starting it, it does not show me finishing it. So something happened in the recording, and either my camera or my computer or something disconnected, and it doesn't show me finishing it. You will get to see the finished look of it, of course, part of it throughout the rest of the video, but a full look at it at the end of the video. But this is at least how you start it. You start it the same way. It's just 3 spokes, and then you come up with your 12 strands in the center, and then you start weaving, but then the video cuts out. You can now see it in the upper portion of the screen, and I did finish weaving it, obviously, and it is very pretty, but unfortunately you can't see the full thing from here. Now I have moved on to these little candies. In the book, Evie likes vanilla candies. I've decided with this one to do a chain stitch to fill these in, instead of doing a satin or a more simple look. I wanted to give it a little more texture and a little more volume. So I went with a chain stitch on this. I really like the look of the chain stitch. I have decided if I do these again, I am going to try a different stitch that I think will look just as good on these. And like all of this was done just spur of the moment, like as I'm stitching it, like I had, you know, planned out my pattern, of course, but I had not planned out my stitch options, like what I was gonna do as I'm stitching it. Like that was just not what I had. Like I just did it as I was doing it, like just deciding while I'm stitching what I'm going to be stitching. So that was kind of fun, kind of spontaneous, just a way to, okay, here we go. And that worked out. It worked out well. I did not finish the chain stitch off right there correctly, so if you're an embroiderer and you see this, please don't judge me. I know I didn't finish it off correctly. I later in the next one decide to do it correctly. I was more or less just testing out things with this first one and seeing how I liked it and if it was something I was going to continue, which I did. But I was just playing around mostly, and I just enjoyed the just the time to spend and go, I like the look of this. And there were several times where I started a stitch, I didn't like how it looked, so I took it out and tried a different stitch. So don't be afraid to play around with your embroidery if you're learning or you're interested in learning. It's completely yours, and that's the great thing about hand embroidery, is it's all unique, and you are what makes it unique. So you put in your stitches how you want to put them in, and you interpret your design how you want to interpret it, and you give it its own look. So that was the fun part for me with this one, was just I think I'm gonna give this a try, and I think I like the look of this, and well, that didn't exactly turn out how I thought it was going to, but it's not bad. But I think next time I'm gonna do it differently. Just like with the lettering, I did not anticipate the letters taking as long as they took, and obviously they did, so that was the part that decided me on, I don't think I'm going to do lettering anymore. That's just not for me. And you know, some people do lettering and do it well, and that's great. I would have to get a lot more practice in on doing lettering, and a lot more stitch options at my disposal, I think is the right word I'm looking for there. I would have to get a little more adept at knowing which stitches to use when, I guess where I'm going with that one, because I did not feel up to the task of those letters, and it just felt extra daunting doing them, especially with it taking as long as it took to actually do them all. So unless that happens, I won't be stitching any more letters. So I continued the chain stitch into the twisty part of the candy wrapper, and I felt like these, or at least one of these, needed to really be in here, because Evie, for one, is always eating vanilla candies, but it also becomes a kind of fixation point for the villain, because she always smells like vanilla. So just a little something that I thought I would throw in there that would be cute, and that people who have read the book would get the reference to. I wish that instead of doing 2 candies, though, that I had done an eyeball. And if you've either read the blurb on the back of the book or read the book itself, you would understand the reference, the eyeball. And I don't want to ruin anything for anyone who hasn't read it. Eyeball is mentioned in the little blurb on the back, but it's not mentioned, it doesn't give anything away other than the fact that there's one squished. So I don't want to give anything away on that one, but I wish I had made one of these candies an eyeball instead of a candy in this one. But you know, hindsight's 20/20, and that's one of the ones that I was like, why didn't I do that? So we're finishing up this side of this one with the chain stitch, and then moving on to the other side. And I mean, it turns out nicely. Like, again, this is 6 strands of embroidery floss. It's good and chunky. And it's just, it gives it a very whimsical look, which is very on theme for Assistant to the Villain anyway. So I really like this. And aside from doing 2 candies instead of 1 and adding in an eyeball, there's not really much about this one that I would have changed. I'm really pleased with the pattern I came up with, and how it turned out overall. So I do the next one a little bit different, and you'll see that as we get into that here in just a second. But as far as Assistant to the Villain and Evie's obsession with vanilla candies, it's cute, it's quirky, it's one of those things, you know, everybody's got their thing. So I really like that it's that. And it also gives you a little sneak peek into Tristan, who is the villain, into his, maybe he's not such a bad guy after all if he keeps vanilla candies on his desk for his assistant. So we finished that one off, and we're moving on to the next one, and I continue doing the chain stitch. And as you can see, I kind of play around for a second with this one, like, do I want to continue doing the chain stitch? But then I decide, okay, yeah, I'm going to continue doing the chain stitch. And then I decide, like, right there, I'm kind of like, am I going to do the normal chain stitch, or am I going to do a double chain stitch? But I went with the standard traditional chain stitch. I'll go over that again in just a second when we get into a little more of that next piece, because that's something that I've not done before, and I really wanted to try my hand at it. So I do, it's just not as easy, or maybe not as easy, as it's something that I hadn't practiced, so I was not prepared for it, but it still turned out well. And again, that's the great thing with just stitching. Just stitch, just play with it, like learn new stitches as you go, do the things, make the mistakes, take it out and do it again. It's meant to be fun, it's meant to be relaxing, it's meant to be yours. Make it how you want to make it. And here, anyone who is an embroiderer will see, an embroiderer will see, I decided I was going to end my chain stitch correctly this time around. So I had to rethread my needle real quick, and that last pause was I had a knot that I had to detangle. So ta-da, there we go. We've ended that chain stitch correctly, and then we'll move on and do another round of chain stitches on this one. One thing that becomes very clear throughout the story Assistant to the Villain, and is quite clear pretty early on, is that the villain has surrounded himself with a very unique bunch of employees. He refuses to call them friends or anything else. They are his employees. But you've got everybody from Evie, his assistant, to Becky, the HR manager, to Keeley, his head of guard, and even the quirky dragon trainer, who I'm going blank on his name at the moment. Blade? Anyway, I can't remember. So just this quirky cast of characters who are all very unique and very different, but you come to find out they all had some kind of need, and the villain saw that need and filled that gap, so to speak. Stepped in and took it upon himself to fill the need of that little space of what they needed. So again, you start seeing maybe he's not as bad as he's been made out to be. So it makes him very human, very vulnerable, even when he tries to deny or hide the human and vulnerable parts of himself. Now then, we are finishing off this chain stitch, and I'm gonna do the chain stitch, but this is where I attempt to do the double chain stitch. And again, I had not done this stitch before, so this is my first attempt at it, so please don't judge me if you know what this is supposed to look like or have ever done this before. Keep it to yourself. So it's actually a very pretty stitch when done correctly. You will see in a second I actually skip a loop by accident, and I didn't even realize that I skipped it until later when I was editing the video. I was like, oh, that's why that didn't turn out right. Right there, that's where I skipped the stitch, the loop in the stitch, and was like, why didn't that work right? So it's definitely one that requires some practice and some learning. And with any stitching, there's learning curves on all of it. So it's not terrible. I didn't pull it. Well, and if you're a stitcher, you might think it's terrible. Who knows? I thought, well, I can live with it. And as you can see right here, I was a little frustrated with this one not wanting to lay down, so I just put a little tack in there to hold it down and make it stay down. So I did it again on this side, and this time it worked out a little bit better. I do have to move my hoop within my holder so that I can get to my stitch properly, so that I can do it correctly. So, and I have it on really tight, so it takes me a second to loosen this up. So I move that around so that I can get to that. Oh, and there you go, look, you can get to see that 3-spoke woven wheel now. So it turns out really pretty, as you can see. Oh, and in somehow adjusting the angle of my camera, it also turned off my it's got a feature in it where it tracks hand movement, and I keep that turned off because obviously I don't want it tracking my hand movements in these. I want it staying focused on what I'm working on. So it turned the hand tracker back on, and I didn't know it at this time. So I apologize for the fuzziness. I do get it rectified here shortly. But so here is that double chain stitch finishing up that little band, what would be the twisty band on a candy wrapper, and I did put a little extra tack on that one side as well. So, and then we go to these vines, and again the stem stitch works perfect for vines, and these there's another knot. Took just a second, and as you can tell, this does not knot up very often. It's thread, it's going to knot. It's the nature of the beast, so to speak. So that one, it's gonna happen. However, when it's excessive and you're constantly detangling and unknotting your thread, it becomes a huge issue, which was my major complaint with the pearl cotton that I used for the lettering. But moving on and stop complaining about that one again. So again, we do the stem stitch here on the bind, and I'm going to do, this is a lazy daisy stitch. These, and a lazy daisy is just a single part of a chain stitch. So when you start connecting the lazy daisies is when it becomes a chain stitch. So these leaves are much smaller than the leaves in the vines at the top of this pattern, so it worked much better to do the lazy daisy for these instead of doing either the satin stitch or a leaf stitch. Some of those just need larger spaces for them to fill out and look proper, so the lazy daisy worked great for these. And here we go, I'll continue with the chain stitch on the rest of these vines, and then come back and fill back in the lazy daisies for the leaves. But sorry, I meant the stem stitch, not the chain stitch. So back to the book. So in all of the stuff going on, and like I said, you know, things start being revealed. Well, Evie starts finding out some things about her family, especially her dad that she didn't know, and things start coming to light, and then also things about her mom that she didn't know that starts coming to light, and she's just finding out that things were not exactly how she was told they were when she was younger, and she's been led to believe ever since then. So she's getting disillusioned about those things, and then also learning some things about Tristan, the villain, and his family, and not just his parents but his siblings, and their dynamics and their relationship. Again, just fun quirkiness going on with dysfunctional family aspects thrown in there that just kind of seems to add to the quirkiness of the whole storyline, which is a lot of fun. It was very entertaining, and I love, and not stupid humor, I like funny humor. Stupid humor just makes me mad. This was not stupid humor. Maybe a little slapstick humor in there, but not any really like dumb humor. So I really appreciated that. But there are definitely a lot of just laugh out loud comical moments where conversations between characters are going on and things are said, situations arise, and the way that they're handled. I mean, just a whole lot of things just kind of culminate just for humor, the humor aspect of it. And again, I just love this quirky cast. I feel like I'm starting to repeat myself a little bit, and it's getting a little difficult to really talk about it without giving any spoilers or giving anything away, and I really don't want to do that. I don't want to ruin this for someone who hasn't read it yet, who does want to go out and read it. So I definitely don't want to give any spoilers out. So I just, as fun as it is, it's difficult to talk about the story without giving spoilers away. Again, I love the fairy tale aspect of it, and I think there's a lot of fairy tale, like common fairy tale tropes that are all compiled in here, and which again adds to the fun, adds to the humor, adds to the entertainment of it all, and it's definitely worth a read. And if you like just fun popcorn, light-hearted, fluffy reads, even though it does have a darker side, and it does have dark humor, and it does have death and dismemberment and all the stuff too, it's still comical, it's still entertaining, and it's still just fun. So we are finishing up our Lazy Daisies for the leaves on this vine, and we're going to be moving on to the book and doing a back stitch on the book to outline the book in. I don't love a back stitch, but I did have a purpose in mind for this back stitch. So back stitch is great for outlining things, but again, I don't love the look of it. It's broken to me, like it just looks broken to me, and especially for the book, that's not the look that I wanted. But again, this had a purpose, so I was going to do what's called a whipped back stitch, and as soon as I finish outlining this in the back stitch and getting all the lines done in the back stitch on this, you'll see what the whipped part of the back stitch looks like, and it just, to me, it smooths it out. It gives it a more complete, more finished look, and it takes out those gaps, or not really gaps, but breaks that are in the line where your stitches go into your material. So I really like the look of the whipped, any of the whipped stitches, or even threaded stitches, but definitely the whipped back stitch. So again, you come up at the end of one of your lines, you pick a point, and you come up out from under one of your stitches, and you pick a side to come out from under. So I came out on the right side of that stitch. So all of my other stitches in the threading or the whipping of this back stitch need to come back out on the right side of each stitch. So as you can see, you come out on the right, you cross it over to the left, and you thread it back under, and you come out on the right. And then I'm going to finish it off on this last stitch of this line, and again, since you're coming out on that right hand side, you're just going to tuck it back down up under on the right hand side of that stitch, and then I'm going to come back up on the inside of this corner, and I'm going to continue just whipping all of this back stitch to complete the look. I chose the color palette for this embroidery project based on the color palette of the book. I know I didn't get all of the colors from the book, but the main color was purple, of course, because that's the background color for the cover. Red was a big color in the first book, this book, as well, but I didn't love the red sprayed edges with the purple. To me, it just clashed. It didn't go well. So for this embroidery project, I intentionally left the red out. However, I did incorporate some darker pink with the woven wool rose to kind of, I guess, add or tie in some extra color. And then of course you've got the green in there. The candy vanilla, it's kind of a creamy color, so I went with cream for that. The vines, the foliage is mint, and I chose vines to represent the forest where the villain's hideout is. Obviously I didn't want to do trees. They're kind of big, or can be big, and take up a lot of space. Vines kind of fit in nicely with the look that I was going for with this project. So that was the purpose of the vines, and then of course now we know the purpose of the candies. And the book itself, I wanted to just kind of, you know, put that in there because this is based on a book. And yes, again, I know that the sprayed edges of the book itself in the special edition that first released are red. Again, I don't like the red. It clashes in my opinion. So I chose to go with the lighter purple. And this is also the color of the sprayed edges on Booktube, so I do kind of, I guess, tie that in there as well. This character, I have intentionally not spoken of this character until now. For one, I didn't want to talk about him until we were stitching him and seeing him. But this is Kingsley. Kingsley is a frog who wears a crown, and he communicates with signs. So you go ahead and let your imagination run wild and tell me what fairy tale that brings to mind with that little tidbit and aspect of it. Kingsley, while not a very communicative dialogue-wise character, he is very, very prevalent throughout the whole story. Even when he's not supposed to be there, he is there, and it's just entertaining. He's lots of fun. He and Evie have some really hysterical conversations, even though his side is just one-worders. Him and his little crown and his little signs. It's just cute. It's just a super cute aspect of this story. Again, I have just enjoyed just reading this, and actually I flew through reading Assistant to the Villain. I loved it so much, I just flew through it. So again, I have gone back and I have reread it and kind of taken the time to really digest it and not just fly through it. But I did take more time with reading the second book because I didn't want to fly through it. I wanted to savor it and enjoy it, so I did take my time. So with Kingsley, again, I outlined him in a backstitch in a darker green, and then to fill him in with a lighter green, I broke this green down into 3 strands of embroidery floss instead of using the full 6 strands. You know, frogs are kind of slimy and slick looking, so I wanted to give him a smooth finish, not a chunky finish. So I did obviously want to outline him and give his detail an outline so that didn't kind of get lost in the filling him in part of it. But for the fill in and like the body itself, I did want to give it a smoother look, so we went with a 3-strand lighter green, and I really liked the way this turned out and the look it gave him, and it does give it more of a slick froggy look. I want to go ahead and talk about the crown while I'm continuing to fill in Kingsley here. The crown, unfortunately, is another one of those aspects where my camera said it was recording, my computer said it was recording, but somehow it disconnected or decided to stop recording before I got very far into that. So you can tell it a little bit in the pattern that's been traced onto the material. The crown has a 3-dimensional look to it, so you've got the part that's the inner part that sits on the head, and then you've got the outer part, which is the part that you would see while it's sitting on the head. So I wanted to kind of represent that with my stitching. So again, the crown is another thing that I used 3 strands of embroidery floss on in a gold color so that it kind of had that smoother, more detailed look. So for the inner portion of the crown, I went with a horizontal stitch, and again, it's in 3 strands, and you'll see it here in a second. I know it's kind of difficult for you to imagine it while I'm talking about it and stitching a frog at the same time, but use your imagination if you will. So I did the inner part, or what would be considered the inner part of the crown, in a 3 strand in a horizontal stitch, and then I went to what would be the outer portion of the crown and did a 3 strand vertical stitch. And then again, in the spoke parts of the crown, the points of it, I still used that 3 strand, but in the very tips of those those points, I used a small French knot to give that kind of a little extra definition. And there I just kind of give you a little tutorial, I guess, of one way you can separate embroidery thread so that you can use smaller portions of it instead of the whole 6 strands. And here I'm finishing up Kingsley. He's coming along nicely. Now for Kingsley's eye, I'm going to use 6 strands of white embroidery floss, and I'm going to do a French knot, and then in the center of that French knot I'm going to come up through with 2 or 3 strands of black. I can't remember right off the top of my head which one I decided to go with on that, but I just come up in the center of the French knot, and I pretty much just go right back down in the center of that French knot, just to give it a little pupil to make it look like an eyeball, which you'll see here in just a second as well. Thank you so much for following along on my first book review / tutorial on embroidery. And if you liked this project, if you liked the book review, if you want to see more things like this, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. Leave us a comment, let us know, and actually I'm considering doing a giveaway with this one as well. So the only way I get notified on who is liking or subscribing or anything like that, it depends on your settings, I guess, on your privacy settings as far as subscribers go. But if you leave a comment, I do see those. I don't see who likes the video, but I do see who leaves a comment, and I can respond to those. So there's Kingsley and his eyeball. Turned out super cute. I really love the way he looks just sitting there. And then here's the crown, but unfortunately I don't get very many stitches into this before the feed just cuts off for some reason. And again, if you would like to be entered into a drawing to win this embroidery project with cute little Kingsley on it, leave us a comment, and it doesn't have to be anything except the word enter. If you just leave a comment that says enter, you'll be entered for the drawing. There's the finished project. It turned out so nice. I'm really pleased with the look of this. Again, thank you so much for following along. I hope you have enjoyed. Give us a subscribe.